Why play Executioners? Well, you might have AD or melee items that you can use towards a melee carry. You want to play a high cap reroll that can often win you the game by just hitting your 3 stars. Or you have a really good spot for Rengar. Rengar is the main unit you're going to be playing with Executioners, so if you start the game off with many Rengars or augments that can support you in hitting a Rengar 3, then Executioners is a very viable and strong option for you to play. However, this board can be very hard to stabilize before 3 stars. Rengar is not very tanky and doesn't do that much damage at 2 stars, so a lot of times that transition from you getting to your 2 stars to your 3 stars in order to win the game could often be very difficult, leading to a lot of bot 4s or potentially 8s. This comp is very swingy in terms of the spikes that you need to hit. Additionally, it's not a guaranteed win after hitting, because a lot of times if there are matchups that have extreme burst damage, your Rengar won't be able to heal in time and can often die too soon. Additionally, it's very reliant on certain spikes, namely the 5 Executioner spike, which gives extra durability, so not only do you have to hit your units, you also have to maintain or hit other spikes, which can be remedied by certain augments, but that all goes back to this comp being very swingy, so be careful while playing it. Now, before we get much further, please make sure to like and subscribe. It does help me out as a TFT content creator. I do daily TFT guides, such as this one, or some other content that's more for fun and patch reviews and stuff like that. If you want to get the most out of your set 14 TFT experience, then this is a really good channel for you to like and subscribe, and it does help me out, especially in these trying times for me where I've just went broke upgrading my PC. So now, what are Executioners? So Executioners is basically like a built-in IE or Jewel Gauntlet, Infinity Edge or Jewel Gauntlet is the way you can think about this trait. It's the dedicated critical strike chance / damage trait. Basically what happens is Executioner abilities can critically strike. They also gain bonus critical strike chance and critical strike damage. If you don't know, whenever it says abilities can critically strike, if you then give above 100% critical strike chance, you could also get like more crit strike damage. And if you have another item, like for example if you put an IE or Jeweled Lotus or anything like that on units, then it will also give bonus critical strike damage. If the target's health is below 20%, the bonus critical strike damage is doubled. So Executioners kind of like have like this built-in quote-unquote like fake execute ability as well, which is really interesting. So if the target's health is below 20%, you're basically almost guaranteeing that they're going to die because you're going to do so much damage whenever you cast your next ability. If you can see, you can play 2, 3, 4, or 5 Executioners, of which there are 5 Executioner units that you can play. So usually, you know, it's just increasing critical strike chance and a little bit critical strike damage. From 4 to 5, it doesn't look like there's a huge spike from 45 to 50 and from 15 to 15 for the critical strike damage. However, the extra durability that you get for 5 Executioner is going to be really important, which we'll talk about later, which is why you often end up playing around 5 Executioner if you're playing Executioners. So, when should you play this comp, or when should you play Executioners? A lot of times you're playing it around having melee items. Melee items work really well because often when you're playing this comp, it kind of, the main line that you usually choose is the one where you're playing Rengar 3. There are other variations which you can play, but typically those are kind of mixed boards that don't really fit into playing around Executioners in particular. If you're playing Vertical Executioner, you're often going to be playing around a Rengar carry, so you want to have melee style items. You want to have Omnivamp items that can help with sustain. You want to have Titans. Even some other items like QSS and Edge of Night are also possibilities that you can play. Additionally, you can also play this comp from having an emblem. Executioner emblem is really strong because not only does it give the Executioner ability to other units, the Executioner emblem, because all the frying pan ones have bonus effects, has a really good bonus effect of making critical strikes do more damage, basically like bypassing 40% of armor and MR. But additionally, things like Cooking Pot or Executioner Emblem help you to stabilize a lot earlier, as well as can scale your units very effectively. So this is a really good comp to play with an early Cooking Pot and an early Rengar or Graves that you can then feed, ideally Rengar, and then absolutely cap out extremely high and win the game. So let's talk about the boards. Before we do that, I'm just going to briefly talk about the units themselves. So the low cost unit, Graves, basically he has this effect where he's basically just firing 5 projectiles. Graves used to be really busted, and now he got broken. He used to be really busted, but then he kind of got his ankles broken a little bit through some of the patches. Rengar recently got nerfed, still really strong, getting another nerf in the upcoming patch, but right now Rengar is kind of like top tier Giga unit if you hit 3-star Rengar. Basically, he has built-in Omnivamp where he's healing a bunch. Then he also jumps, does physical damage. and then additional strikes doing additional physical damage. All of these have the potential to critically strike because of his executioner ability, and then the jump that he has where he jumps 2 hexes, it increases with each cast, which allows him to basically just keep targeting the lowest health enemy and basically kill. He's very good at sniping the back line. He's very good at like just cleaning up and killing a bunch of little units on the board, eventually making him really viable to go infinite, right? Just keeps killing, keeps healing, keeps doing damage, cleans up the whole board. Vex is Divinicorp and Executioner. Vex is an AP unit that works in the backline. Vex is a little bit interesting or creative in that she scales off of Omnivamp. So if you give her some Omnivamp, she can also turn that into bonus true damage. Vex isn't a primary carry in Executioners particularly. Right now, she's kind of like a little bit in between comps. It's hard to decide exactly where to play her, but she's a good holder of extra AP items. Urgot is the 5 cost. If you have an Urgot, you play an Urgot. Just amazing at scaling because you can also not only execute units but also give you loot, so he can scale you really effectively. So if you hit an early Urgot, works really well, but a lot of times he's just a good +1 unit to play because of the execute. And then Varus, I put them out of order, but Varus I want to talk about with Rengar. A lot of times Varus is good at pairing up with the Rengar to kind of clean up shop, right? Varus has a stun as well as has a chain that does damage to 3 enemies, which allows you to do a lot of spread damage. He's really good at spreading AoE, and that works really well with Rengar because he can basically clean up. If Rengar doesn't kill somebody and leaps away, the Varus will clean up, and if the Varus gets somebody really low in the back line, then the Rengar could clean up whatever the Varus. So they work really well in tandem with each other. The main board that you end up playing is something that looks like this: 5 Executioner, 3 Street Demon, 2 Strategist, 1 Divinicorp. Basically what you're trying to play is just as many executioners as possible. So this is a board that fits in on level 7. Obviously this is with an Urgot. Until you have an Urgot, you're going to try and play somebody else in Urgot's place, but this board is complete on level 7 roughly. The idea is that you're basically going to be primary carrying Rengar. Rengar is the most important unit, and it's the unit that's going to matter the most out of everybody on this board. Basically, whenever you think about executioners, a lot of times you're thinking about Rengar reroll. Now, why is that? Because if you look at this board, it doesn't have that much frontline. Nico can't really tank everything on her own, and Strategist isn't the greatest in terms of tank synergies. Like, you can't play super deep into it and expect it to do really well. And Echo is just here for synergies. You want to try and boost this Rengar as much as possible, so often you're just playing Executioner with Street Demon. There are other lines that play more into Divinicorp. You can play Divinicorp with Executioner around the Vex and the Rengar as a dual carry. It's just not as good because if you're playing Rengar, it's actually way more effective to just put in Street Demon. The extra HP that you get and the AP and the AD works really well because it scales them up, and then Executioner can make use of those extra AP AD because of the critical strike basically stockpiling on the base stats. When you're thinking about Rengar items, I think the best set of items is double healing. Rengar kind of reminds me or is reminiscent of Smeech if you want to have a connection that you can try and draw to. For those of you who played the previous set and are from the previous set watching my channel, you can think of Rengar kind of as the Smeech of this set. Very similar traits, right? Executioner, very similar in terms of abilities, just jumping around, hitting units multiple times and attacking a bunch. Double healing works really well on Rengar because you want this Rengar to go infinite. If you look at this board, you want Rengar to be a primary source of damage, obviously, because you're going to be trying to go for Rengar 3-star often when you're rerolling. Additionally, you don't have that much frontline, so Rengar eventually is going to be taking a brunt of the damage. He's going to be taking a huge amount of just damage eventually because your front lines are going to die, and he's going to be jumping around, he's going to be behind enemy lines, he's going to be the closest unit to target. It's going to be really scary for him. So whenever you're thinking about this unit, you want him to basically sustain himself. So you want him to be tanky. You don't necessarily want tank items. Omnivamp is a good way to do that because if he's doing a huge chunk of damage with those critical strikes, that's going to turn into a huge chunk of healing. So it's going to be very hard to deal with. So he can whittle down, he can take a bunch of damage, and then bang, with double Omnivamp, he'll heal up. So a lot of times you put Bloodthirster. Bloodthirster just gives a good amount of stats, good base Omnivamp. AD also has a shield once you're at 40% health. So it has a little bit of like a second reset life effect where you can use that shield to kind of protect yourself from just near death. Hodge is a really good item pairing because you're trying to boost these executioners to have 100% crit chance so that they basically are always critting and doing as much damage as possible. Hodge, being a glove component, is often just enough to make this Rengar kind of pop off between this and Divinicorp, giving a little bit of extra critical strike chance that the Rengar is going to keep doing critical strikes. So Hodge is really good. It's just a balance of damage and Omnivamp, which works really nicely, and also gives some good base stats, which helps the Rengar do a bunch of damage. So it's a very efficient item, especially if you're playing this type of carry. The last item, I think the best item, you really want this Rengar just to be tanky. You want him to sustain himself and survive as long as possible. He's going to be taking a lot of hits very early in the round. So Titans works really well. Titans is a nice well-rounded item. It gives attack speed, it gives armor, and then it gives these stacks, which gives you bonus attack damage, ability power. It just works out really nicely, right? Then once at full stacks, you also gain armor and magic resist. So that's what I mean by it's a well-rounded item. These stats aren't crazy. They're not super broken or anything that's going to make them absolutely a monster, but they are a little bit of sprinkling of everything. Base stats are really good because you have a lot of crit chance from Executioner, so you can then convert that into a bunch of critical strike damage. You want to have high base stats so that you can realize a really strong critical strike. Additionally, the armor NMR is really important because it helps the Rengar stay alive as long as possible. Now, in terms of other units that you want to itemize, you typically don't have enough room to kind of itemize towards tanks with this comp. A lot of times when you're going for Rengar 3, the actual way to kind of stabilize and cap out really high is to also go for Varus 3. Now, with Varus, you usually just want a Shojin. The last items are usually like whatever you can kind of fit in, but often you'll just put like the extra items like Omnivamp and then either base stats, so like Rabadon's works really well because, like, you know, you can just give yourself a lot of AP. Things like Guardbreaker are also fine. Anything that gives him a lot of stats is good because you can then do a lot of damage with the critical strike. Because he hits multiple units, Morello is pretty good on him, but this isn't really a damage item, so a lot of times you can move Morello onto a Vex later. Vex, typically, if you have a lot of tiers, you can put blue buff, so blue buff Morello. Gunblade is often pretty good on her because of the Omnivamp effect, but it's not entirely essential. But the idea is that with these two other units, Varus and Vex, whatever items you're not using on Rengar, which are usually going to be your AP items. You don't really want Rod items on Rengar, you don't really want tier items on Rengar besides the Hodge. You just make whatever items could kind of make sense, right? Guard Breakers, Giant Slayers, even Gunblades, like whatever you can, you put on the units. If you're going for Varus 3, go for Shojin. If you're going for Vex dual carry, which is a possibility sometimes, then you can go for a blue buff because blue buff is pretty essential for this Vex to pump out consistent damage. Both Varus and Vex both hit multiple units, so they're both good holders of Morello. So with this comp, because you don't really want to make tank items, I would recommend to always prioritize Morello as your anti-heal item. So Morello on either Vex or Varus will work wonders. Often if you have extra items, you're not really ever going to itemize Graves here. All of your AD items are typically going to go on the Rengar, but the Graves is going to have a little bit of a hard time getting items. Additionally, with this setup, you usually don't want to play Golden Ox because Golden Ox kind of leans a little bit more into playing around Divinicorp Executioners. So there used to be a version of this comp that looks kind of like this, which was Graves reroll. And then you had like a Senna, and you played something like this. And then some other Divinicorp units, you would play deeper into Divinicorp and less into Executioner. I don't think this comp is very high cap or very good right now. It might become something that's a little bit more meta later. Right now with Executioners, Graves is kind of fake. You're just better off using that gold to hit Rengar Varus. You don't really have to go for Graves 3 unless it's a Scuttle Puddle or something crazy like that. So I would recommend just playing this variation. And if you're playing this variation, don't really play deep into Divinicorp because you're better off just playing Street Demons with Strategist. If you don't have Strategist, if you don't have the Nico yet, then just play Street Demon with like Bruiser, for example. You can play a Mundo that you've been holding on to from early on. So this is just a better version. If you're playing Rengar carry, it just gives him more stats, allows him to go more infinite. Graves, though, does hit multiple units, so he's actually a really good holder of a Last Whisper. If you have a lot of items, you can put Last Whisper on him, or you can find some other way to make Shred at one point with some of the other units. Now, something that's really important with this comp, obviously I said double healing on Rengar. The last item, Titans, I think is really important. I think that Rengar doesn't really perform that well outside of these sets of items. Your last item, you could rearrange it to other things, where I'm just going through some other possibilities here. You can go Edge of Night because it can just de-aggro, give him a second lease at life. It works really well if you have the Edge of Night augment. QSS also works really well, but it's a little bit overkill, but it just makes sure that the Rengar doesn't get stunned. If your opponent has a lot of stun and you realize that you're losing fights because your Rengar is getting stunned, then you might want to play towards QSS. But typically you would rather have Titans because the sustain that you get from just living and being unkillable is really good. Additionally, I'm going to put another Rengar here. Something that's really important with this comp is also Ornn artifacts. I know I haven't done an Ornn artifact guide yet. I'm working on it. It should be out like towards the end of the week or next week. So please bear with me. I've been between computers, like I say every single time. It's really difficult sometimes. Silvermere Dawn works really well with Rengar because of the crit. He basically just gets a huge bunch of AD. He'll jump on a unit, he'll just kill them, just one-shotting everybody. I think his best item, however, is Prowler's Claw, as soon as I can find it. So I can show you guys. Silvermere, OPQ, Prowler's Claw is really good on him. Prowler's Claw just allows him to like jump around even more, and it gives critical strike chance and attack damage. Like I said before, if you go over 100% critical strike chance, it will turn into more critical strike damage, which works really well with the Executioner trait because it's just they just have it already, so they'll just one shot. But he's a really good holder of Ornn artifacts. I think even Mittens is okay on him. There's some other ones that are okay, like some of the range ones and some of the like Gold Collector and stuff like that. But typically the ones that I look at, I'm thinking like, damn, this guy's gonna pop off. Silvermere Dawn, but especially Prowler's Claw. So this is a comp that you could also just try and rip and take Ornn artifacts, because there are a lot that you can use in order to stabilize your board. You can even make use of some of the AP ones and play towards this Varus or this Vex. Now, when you're playing this comp, something that's really important is 5 Executioner. So I talk about this Urgot a lot. If you don't find this Urgot early, you're stuck with 4 Executioner. Now, you might look at it and say to yourself, well, 5% critical strike chance, who cares? Same critical strike damage, who cares? It's not that big of a spike. What do you mean you need 5 Executioner? The durability is really important. The biggest problem with this comp, and this is why the comp isn't very stable, is that look at your front line and look at your damage. Your Rengar is pretty much everything, and so your Varus is kind of here, but your Varus won't be able to cast and do a bunch of damage unless your Rengar is living forever. You need this Rengar to go infinite. You need him to jump around and live as long as possible. You can't have him get bursted down. If he gets bursted and he dies instantly, the game is just over. So a lot of times when you're at 2-star Rengar, 2-star Varus, this comp, you lose every single fight. It's very hard to stabilize because this Rengar can often just die to like a massive hit. Like think like a Techie board with a Brand just one-shots. Think another Executioner board where somebody else one-shots. Think a Xayah board even, like Anima, and the Xayah just one-shots the Rengar. It's hard to tell exactly because the leap distance increases every single time, so you can't even plan very well around where the Rengar is going to jump besides like your first 1 or 2 casts. So it's very temperamental. This is why it's very first or 8th. Now the best way to stabilize your board is to also have 5 Executioner, because the extra durability that you get on these units, the Graves and the Rengar, helps them to live longer. As long as this Rengar lives long enough to get a cast off, he will heal up. The biggest stressful part of the Rengar is in between the casts. If he didn't cast and he's just like attacking, he can get bursted down and die. As soon as he casts, he does a shit ton of damage, heals back to full, and you're fine. But that's the problem. It's just a matter of timing, and there's a lot of RNG with it, which is why this comp is very risky. Unless you know for sure that you have a good spot for Rengar, like let's say you have Cooking Pot, where you're feeding him HP, so he's going to be more tanky, or let's say you have an Executioner emblem, or you have that, I forget what it's called, like Cutlass or whatever, where it gives you gold for all the critical strike hits that you have, and then you get, you just have infinite econ, so you know for sure you can guarantee your Rengar. It's very easy to go bot 4 with this comp. Additionally, Varus 3 is really important in stabilizing. So a lot of times, even if you hit Rengar 3, often you might want to just stay at a lower level, like level 7 or level 8, to try and hit this Varus 3. Because it's reliant on a 5 cost, you not only have to hit Rengar, but often you're going to have to push levels in order to hit that Urgot. Sorry that the Sen is on my board. I forgot it was on my board. And when you're looking at your max cap, however, other 5 costs work really well. Garen and Viego work really well. Viego works especially well if you have an Executioner emblem. Executioner emblem Viego is a great pick, but you can put Executioner emblem on pretty much anybody. It works out really well. Garen works really well because you can spread that Executioner onto other units, which gives durability as well as gives other stats. It works very nicely. If you hit Viego, then you can often drop Graves. You don't really care too much about Golden Ox, or you can even drop Vex if you have Varus 3, but if you don't have Varus 3, then you can drop the Varus. But you have lots of opportunities, lots of potentials to cap out around the Garen. Additionally, you can give another synergy to Rengar, which will help him to pop off. Something like Strategist works really well, because then he'll get damage amp, because you have all critical strike chance from Executioner, you get some damage amp from Strategist, and then you have your base stats from your items. Works really well, works wonders. I would always suggest having a third item tank, by the way. I know I didn't mention it before. I'm just going to hop back to that idea. You might look at this and say, why would you put Strategist on him? Just put a guard breaker on him or put a damage amp item on him. I think it makes him too glassy. You really want this third item to be a sustain and or tank and or like survivability item, or else this guy just fucking dies. Take it from me. Anyways, many ways to cap out the board, usually around the 5 cost. You could also play other 5 costs. An additional thing that you can do is play deeper into Street Demon. So, you know, you can play a Samira and like pretty much anybody. Even a Jinx works out good sometimes, and you can roll for Jinx 3. But you can play 5 Street Demon if you have a Strategist emblem, or if you have a Street Demon emblem. So emblems can work really well both ways in order to cap out a little bit higher. Like I said before, Street Demon, it does work really nicely because it gives you HP on your Rengar, which is really powerful, and base stats, but additionally also gives HP to your whole board, so it helps all your frontline and all your units become tanky. And if you look at it, if you're playing this version especially, your entire frontline is Street Demon, so you're going to get a lot of tank stats, which will help you out quite a bit if you're playing around this board. Now I'll talk about early game and pivot options. So this is like the main board that you want to play around Rengar 3. What do you do if you don't have a Rengar 3? Well, a lot of times you're going bot 4 because the Vex and the Varus as a backline won't be able to sustain themselves with this type of board. And you can drop down to 4 Executioner because you might not need the durability. So like sometimes you can drop like, you know, you can drop a little bit and you can play deeper into Divinicorp. Divinicorp with this line is a little bit stressful, I would say so. It's not like perfect. A lot of times if you're playing Divinicorp variation, then you're playing something that looks more like this guy, and like you do Executioners with Slayers a lot of the time. It looks something like this, right? And you play like 4 Divinicorp, 4 Executioner, and then you can drop like one of the Slayer units. But it looks something like this. And often it's just a little bit less powerful of a comp. This is like usually if you're trying to play Vex primary carry, because stacking Divinicorp kind of works almost like stacking Executioner, but you get the best of both worlds. You get deeper into Executioner and deeper into Divinicorp. However, this board, as you can see, it's pretty expensive. It's like a level 9 board. A lot of times you're dropping like even more Executioners just to make room for more Divinicorp units like this. It's a little bit awkward. It's a little bit difficult. But typically what you do instead is you just play Slayer at this point. Vex doesn't really need the deep Executioner that much. She's kind of like in between comps. She's not good as a solo carry for that reason, because 5 Executioner is not super important. Like, it's really good on her and she does clean up really well, but a good pivot option if you have Vex is just to like drop all this shit and just play around Zed, right? That's like the main thing that I would say to do. So let's say you have this type of board, you can just play Slayers. That's the main pivot angle. Now Slayers, there's not necessarily a solid reroll option for Slayers besides we'll see if the patches change besides Shaco. But what you end up doing is you just play this, right? You just kind of rotate off of, you rotate off and you play Divinicorp Slayers. This was a comp we already talked about before. But basically, all of your items that you used on Rengar can actually just go on to your Zed. And if you have good Vex items, you can just play around Vex Zed as a duel. And this is like your main pivot option. If you see that you're not going to hit Rengars, if you think that you don't have a good spot for reroll anymore, or if you hit early Zed and you have like a board that you can pivot, like if you have Vex and Zed already and you don't have any Rengars, this is a board that you can pivot to. There are some pivot points with the Vex and some of the Executioners. You could play, like as I was showing you, I was slowly transitioning in this video for a reason. I didn't just switch slides because I was trying to show you like you can slowly cook this board from Executioner into Slayer. That is a common thing that I see different people do. It's just a matter of recognizing if your spot is good enough to support the Zed. But this is the main other melee carry in terms of items. So a lot of times you'll angle yourself towards Rengar because that's the higher cap, like insta win if you hit Rengar 3. But if you don't hit Rengar 3, then if you hit a Zed early, or if you like, you know, hit Zed on carousel or something like that, you're scared that you're not gonna hit Rengar, maybe you're contested, somebody's trying to force into you like a dummy, you can then pivot into Slayers and still salvage your game. The Slayer comp is a level 8 comp, while the Rengar board is a level 7 comp, but this is a good pivot angle. If we're talking about early game boards, early games, a lot of times you can play around an early Graves. I wouldn't really play around Rengar unless I had an early Rengar. Honestly, if you start the game off with a Rengar, go ahead, play Rengar reroll, it's fine. If you don't start the game off with a couple copies of Rengar, you're probably not going to hit Rengar before you die. I'm going to be honest, this comp is very 1st or 8th because without Rengar 3, it just falls apart really fast. So be careful, stay safe out there, don't go for this Rengar unless you have an early Rengar, in my opinion. But of course, you, do what you want. If you have these, a lot of times any real melee holder is good. You can play around Slayers and pivot into Rengar, or you can just start the game off with Executioner like Graves and play like Golden Ox and then pivot into 5 Executioner and transfer your items off. The items that you want to start out with is usually like melee style items. I'm just going to put the, you know, the ones that I wanted to build. These aren't necessarily the best Shaco items or the best Graves items or even the best Zed items, but a lot of the times Titans just works really well eventually on Rengar because you get the durability, so then the armor NMR works really well with that. So usually these are like your better Rengar items, I would say. If whatever your early melee kind of user is what you would want to play around. Additionally, if you have AP items and you eventually just hit like let me explain this. If you start off the game with like AP items and you're playing around like an AP carry, let's say you make like, you know, something like this, and then you guys just got dropped a bunch of AD items, you can maybe even pivot into one of those lines, even with like the most basic of AP boards. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that, but it's more so like you're playing AP, you get dropped a bunch of Rengars, and then you get dropped like a full BT Hodge, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, you know, I can't really make items for my backline carries, maybe I can pivot into this. The reason that it works is because the Executioner line has 2 backline AP carries, which is very, very unique a lot of the times in these type of comps when you have melee carries. You basically have a melee carry and then you have 2 backline AP users. So if you get dropped a bunch of AP items, then you get dropped a bunch of melee items. It actually works really well to pivot into this board if you hit the units, right? A lot of it is dependent on hitting the unit, so be careful, but it does allow you to have a lot of flexibility with your items, right? If you have a lot of AP items, you still have a use for them. Maybe not JG, let's take Rabadons to make it really exacerbated, right? You still have a potential to itemize towards multiple units. And then if you have more AD items, there are other AD units you can sometimes put items on Graves and maybe go for Graves 3, but I wouldn't always recommend it. So what are your conditions for success? We talked about it a lot, but you want to have a good reroll spot. Hitting Rengar 3 is essential, to say the least. You're not going to top 4 unless you have the Rengar 3. Also, I would go as far as to say you're not going to top 4 unless you have 5 Executioner. I think if you're playing Executioners, at least the way that I'm outlining in this video, which is like the main way to play it, you need 5 Executioner. The only time you might want to play less Executioners is if you're playing like just Vex as a primary carry, like nobody else. As soon as you're playing like Varus really wants more Executioners. The reason Vex doesn't need that much Executioner, by the way, is because you get a lot of critical strike from Divinicorp bonus, right? Divinicorp gives 7 plus however much Divinicorp you play, so you get like the extra critical strike here. So it's just a matter of like the extra critical strike damage, so you can play less Executioners a lot of the time, and still like realize the full potential, and you get a lot more stats with Divinicorp. So a lot of times when you're playing Vex, you can sometimes play 5 Executioner and hope that Vex is good enough, but then your front line isn't strong enough. This one kind of supports it a little bit better. If you're playing Vex in particular. If you're playing Exotech, you can play Varus into an Exotech line, like with Hollow Bow, right? So, Varus has, like, Hollow Bow, but, like, it's like, typically... Where's Hollow Bow? Like, typically, these aren't really deep Executioner lines. A lot of times, you're just playing the other traits to get the synergies in other ways. If you're playing Executioner, it's pretty much, you should always be considering that it's going to be primary around Rengar, which is why you need the reroll and uncontested. You also need really good econ, because not only do you have to hit your Rengar 3, you also have to hit 5 Executioner. So there's a lot of conditions in order for you to have that Giga win out. But like I said, this is one of the achievable, quite easy to win with comps. So, you know, if you play it and you play it from a good spot, it will feel like a free win. It will be very strong, and you'll be very happy and proud of how much LP you're gaining, obviously. Augments to support it also help a lot. Rolling augments or dupes, as well as a good combat augment. Whatever you can get the Rengar 3 earlier will help you out a lot, because it's so dependent on the Rengar 3. Combat augments, they either help you like to hit, or help you in order to like realize more damage, give you more base stats, or damage amp can work really well. Good combats could also include giving you like cooking pot, or emblems, right? Things that give you like frying pans to help you to hit that 5 Executioner earlier to stabilize. Like I said before, it's a risky comp, but it has a high potential of win out. So of course, it is broken, it is strong, but try to play it from a good spot to guarantee that you actually hit, and it doesn't just feel like RNG fest with your LP gains. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, as I said before. Hopefully this was informative. Hopefully this was helpful. Enjoy, have fun, and see ya. Bye-bye.